For us, kindergarten readiness isn't just about a child knowing their ABCs or counting to 10. It's about whether they are developmentally, socially, and emotionally prepared to access learning. And when we talk about benchmarks like third grade reading scores, what we're really talking about is a trajectory for all of our scholars and our children. And that trajectory doesn't begin in third grade. It begins the moment a child enters a classroom for the first time.
Welcome to THRIVEcast, a production of the Flint Center for Educational Excellence. My name is Dawn Hibbard, and I will be your host. Our topic today is the importance of kindergarten readiness and the early childhood landscape in Flint. I have with me today Dr. Latoya Summy, Executive Director of Countywide Programs for the Genesee Intermediate School District, Dr. Jody Ramos, Director of Early Childhood Programs at the Genesee Intermediate School District, Superintendent Kevin B. Jones II, Superintendent of the Flint Community Schools, and Dr. Janelle Jamerson, President and CEO of the Flint Center for Educational Excellence. Kindergarten readiness is a powerful predictor of long-term outcomes, and yet, families experiencing poverty often face barriers to accessing high-quality early learning. These early inequities contribute to later gaps in achievement and opportunity. So, Dr. Ramos, as the first director of the EduCare Early Childhood Center in Flint, and now as director of Early Childhood Programs for the Genesee Intermediate School District, can you define for us what kindergarten readiness means?
Hi, Dawn. Thank you. I sure can. So that's a pretty loaded question. I don't know if you have enough time for my full answer, so I'll try and get it down a little bit for you. But first, we just want to make sure that children are ready to engage in a social environment and that they feel confident to engage in a setting that might have rules and routines that vary from their home structure. So this includes things like socializing with other children in larger groups. You know, they may be used to only having 2 or 3 kids in their home or where they're at. Now they're in a classroom with 29, 30 other students. We want to make sure that they're prepared for that and managing their own emotions as it comes to those interactions in the classroom. We also want to make sure children have the foundational skills to succeed academically. When we're looking at fine motor for their writing skills, what they might need there, the areas of math, literacy, and what we call cognitive processing or problem solving. Can they solve a problem if they're encountering an issue? How are they persistent? How do they make sure that they're able to continue to solve that problem? With kindergarten readiness, we also want to make sure that we're looking at alignment between developmental milestones, but also the state's early childhood standards of quality as well, too. Those are there, so we want to make sure, are we looking at those? Are children able to attain those prior to entering kindergarten? But really, our ultimate goal is making sure that they view kindergarten as somewhere that is safe, and that it's fun, and that it's exciting to be there, and really laying that foundational piece for that school readiness piece.
So when should parents begin thinking about kindergarten readiness?
Realistically, at birth. You're always preparing your children all the while from birth. How are we involving them in conversations? Even with their babies, are we babbling back and forth, encouraging them to develop those language skills? Are we pointing out things when we're driving to the doctors, like, oh goodness, now I have to slow down because there's a red light? All of those little things matter all the way from birth, all the way through up to when they're getting ready to enter kindergarten. How do we get them into as many social interactions as possible? In Flint, there is just a wealth of opportunity to have your kids involved in different things. We have home visiting programs, you have the library, you have even just parks. Any of those opportunities to get them out there, have the social interactions, and the more language you can use with them, the better. But realistically, if we're thinking about entering kindergarten and going into that as a 5-year-old, you really want to start thinking that minimally a year prior to. What are some of those opportunities? Where is my child at developmentally? Where are they at with some of those standards that we would like them to have when they enter kindergarten? And what supports might I need to get them there?
Superintendent Jones, in light of the recent focus on academic benchmarks such as third grade reading scores, why is it important for children to be kindergarten ready?
Good question, and thanks for having us today, and thank you for the work that you all do here. For us, kindergarten readiness isn't just about a child knowing their ABCs or counting to 10. It's about whether they are developmentally, socially, and emotionally prepared to access learning from day one. And when we talk about benchmarks like third grade reading scores, what we're really talking about is a trajectory for all of our scholars and our children. And that trajectory doesn't begin in third grade. It begins the moment a child enters a classroom for the first time. If a child starts kindergarten already behind, whether in language development, social skills, or early literacy, they are much more likely to struggle to read proficiently by third grade. And we know that third grade reading is a critical milestone. It's the point where students shift from learning to read to reading to learn, right? If they're not ready at that time, it's going to be very difficult for them to pass tests. We have M-Step here in Michigan. It'd be very difficult for scholars to be ready for that test. So for us in Flint, kindergarten readiness is about equity. And that's an important word. It's about ensuring that every child, regardless of zip code, walks into that classroom with the foundational skills needed to be successful. That means like high quality education, high quality early childhood education, as mentioned, strong partnerships like the center with families, and community-wide commitment to our youngest learners. And so I think, though, to add to that, it's important to emphasize it's not just a school issue. It's a community issue. Readiness starts long before a child ever steps into one of our school buildings. It starts with access to early learning opportunities. It starts with healthcare, stable housing, and families who are supported and empowered. And as a district here in Flint Community Schools, we're being very intentional about aligning our early childhood programs with our K-12 system. So there's continuity for our families and our scholars. We're also working to meet families where they are, because parents are a child's first teacher. And when we invest in them, we're investing in student outcomes. And ultimately, if we want to move the needle on third grade reading, we can't wait until third grade to intervene. We have to start early, stay consistent, and think holistically about what readiness truly means for each one of our early young scholars.
Thank you. Well, now I'm going to throw it to Dr. Jamerson to talk to us a little bit about the early childhood landscape in Flint that prepares young scholars to be kindergarten ready, and how the Early Childhood Collaborative is making a difference for Flint kids.
Yeah, in Flint and communities like Flint across the country, the early childhood system is really diverse. So it includes center-based programs that are funded by the government, federally funded, like Head Start or Early Head Start. Early Head Start allows for children to start as early as 6 weeks of age, and Head Start allows for them to stay in center-based programming through kindergarten entry. You also have the childcare development subsidy that allows for families to select a childcare provider that might be in a center, might be in a home, or even a family friend or neighbor who can provide that care. In Michigan, we're really fortunate to have the Great Start to Readiness program, which is our 4-year-old preschool program. And increasingly, our state government is moving toward that being available for all kids in the state, and even thinking about how we offer that as early as 3 years old. But there are also tuition-based options in our community as well that allow for families who might not qualify for one of those other sources I just talked about to be able to provide safe and supportive environments for their children. I think a lot of times when we talk about early childhood, we think about a center, but a huge part of our early childhood landscape is home-based providers, individuals who are serving up to 6 kiddos in their homes and really transforming their homes into the warm, loving, supportive environments that Dr. Ramos spoke about earlier. And then, even if children aren't in the care of a formal child care center, a huge part of our early childhood landscape is family, friend, and neighbor providers, individuals who families trust, who believe in the success of our children, and are committed to creating spaces where every child can thrive. The role of the Flint Early Childhood Collaborative is really about building a system that works for every Flint kid. And so for us, it's not necessarily about taking a position on a child being in center-based or home-based or family friend or neighbor care, but our aspiration is to ensure that no matter where they go, no matter where parents choose as the best space for their child, that is the highest quality option possible. And the way that we meet that aspiration is through waking up every morning, going to sleep every night, focused on 5 key priorities. The first priority is high quality teaching and learning, that educators in any space that's serving young children have not just the resources, but the competencies necessary to help that child enter kindergarten ready, to regulate emotionally, to socialize with peers, and all the things that Dr. Ramos named much better than I could. The second is intensive family engagement. We know that parents are the first, most important, and forever teacher in the education of their child. And so we partner with parents as experts and equal partners. The third is through enhanced professional development, making sure that it's understanding that the educational landscape is constantly changing and things are constantly emerging. And we want to make sure that educators are always equipped with the best in line, the best in class supports to support our young people. The fourth is related to data utilization and research, that we're not just making assumptions about the quality of the early learning environment or the availability of the early learning environment or the responsiveness of that environment to the needs of kids and families, but that we test that regularly and we use those data to continuously improve our services. And lastly, is focused on coordinated systems, understanding that the rising tide does lift all boats. And so as we're doing work through our 2 key schools, Educare, Flint, and Cummings, we're using those lessons learned to really influence improvements across the ecosystem. And you coordinating a system, like I said earlier, that ensures that early childhood works for every Flint kid.
And so what are some of the results that we've seen from the work that's been done at Educare and Cummings Center for Great Start?
Yeah, I think, and I would definitely encourage Dr. Ramos and Dr. Sami to jump in here. I would say, one of the major outcomes that we've seen from the system perspective is that Educare and Cummings are among the highest quality rated childcare centers in the state of Michigan, joining only about 11% of childcare centers in the state in meeting that demonstrating quality level. And we're very proud of that. But in addition, Educare, Flint, and Cummings were created during the water crisis as a response to a lack of available childcare for kids and families. And over the course of the 7 years of this partnership, more than 1,000 students have come through the halls of Educare, Flint, and Cummings and left demonstrating readiness as defined by higher levels of language development, the higher levels of social emotional development. And I would say with the parents and families who understand that it's not, to Superintendent Jones's point, not just the responsibility of the school, but that they are actually the first most important teachers. I would also say that Educare, Flint, and Cummings are also a platform for policy change. And in no small part, being able to point to the successes at Educare, Flint, and Cummings have influenced expansions in the Great Start to Readiness program throughout the state, ensuring that more kids have access. Our parent ambassadors have lobbied in Lansing, helping to share their stories and understanding why these things are so valuable. But then also, we also understand that, to Superintendent Jones's point, it's not just about education, but it's also about access to healthy food, and it's about stability. And so, every family is paired with a family engagement advocate within the Educare, Flint, and Cummings schools, and they support families in not just navigating the educational experience, but also connecting with the resources that are necessary in the community to ensure that they remain the most important teacher in their child's life and that they have the resources that they need. And, there's so many other things that I could probably speak about, but I would love to give either Dr. Sami or Dr. Ramos an opportunity to talk a little bit about our outcomes at Educare, Flint, and Cummings as well.
Yeah, Janelle, when I was listening to you speak, I was really thinking about the first year at Educare, and we had the students that had started at 6 weeks old and then had gone through the full 5 years. And really thinking, when you're talking about impact, how those families and students felt going through a full 5 years of having full year, full day programming. And that right there to me was a success, in seeing that community that was built within that school there and at Cummings, you see the same things. To Superintendent Jones's point, the collaboration around community is what's going to help us be successful. And that was the success I could feel there. Every staff member, every parent, every community member were together for the best interests of those children. And those parents will still come back to us and say, you guys helped us to make sure that we're achieving, that we knew how to advocate for our children, that we knew how to advocate for ourselves as parents, that we had the resources to be successful. Superintendent Jones touched on earlier about the need for stable housing and healthcare. That's something our family engagement advocates had been able to work with those families on. How can I help you learn how to become a homeowner? How can I help you gain access for healthcare for your child and for yourself as well as a parent, and make sure that those things are taken care of? So when I think of those successes, I just continue to see those kids and those families in my head and just imagining all their smiling faces. And I still see them. I still run into them in the store and they still talk about the impact that it had. And to think that some of those kids have now been gone. It was 2022 as the first year. So 4 years later, I can still run into them in the grocery store and they still remember who I am. And that just means the world to me. That means that we were successful in providing them that environment where they felt supported and ready to move on. And they tell me about all of the wonderful things that they have been doing since there as well, too.
Dr. Ramos, I'm so glad you brought up the first cohort of Educare students, because like you said, it's been 4 years since they left our doors, and that cohort of students are in the 3rd grade this year. And, Superintendent Jones, you made such a, an important lift about the importance of 3rd grade in this transition from explicit reading instruction to increasingly relying on a child's ability to read for them to attain additional information. We're thinking about our kiddos who started with us at 6 weeks old, that Dr. Ramos had from 6 weeks all the way through their kindergarten transition. And we want to know how they're doing. And so, Dawn, to the point of the Early Childhood Collaborative, we see early childhood as birth to age 8. And we don't see the early childhood system as solely the child care framework that I spoke about earlier, but it's also partnerships with our school partners who are responsible for that kindergarten and 3rd grade. We'll be working with Superintendent Jones and other leaders across the county this year, actually, to do a follow-up study on our Educare students and just understand. We know that they left motivated with all of those characteristics that Dr. Ramos spoke about. But we want to know also, to what extent were we able to actually influence that very important 3rd grade reading milestone that, to Superintendent Jones's point, places them at a higher level of likelihood of being successful throughout their educational trajectory.
I'm looking at Superintendent Jones. He looked like he had something to say.
Yeah, I'll hold, but it was eloquently stated.
Okay.
I think that we have to focus our attention, on when you think about those scholars that started at Educare and where they are today. What we really need to dive into is what changed for them, right? So from the time they left you, what atmosphere, culture did we send them into to be educated? From school district to school district, not just Flint, right? Flint Community Schools. They could be in a different type of school. They can be in a charter, a parochial. How are they doing based on where they are? I think that's important. It's important for educators to understand that. It's important for parents to understand that. And if we're going to really, really put scholars in a space to thrive, then we have to sometimes check our own systems and what we have put together. And are we building upon one another for the best work towards our scholars, right? Or are we just putting programs out? And just doing work, right? So what Educare started, or what Flint Community Schools started with our earliest learners, are we ensuring that we're giving them that same impact when they get to 3rd grade?
Superintendent Jones, when we talk about kindergarten readiness, a lot of times we tend to focus on the readiness of the child. and Dr. Ramos and my work together at Educare, we began really pushing on, we can talk about if the children are ready for kindergarten. Is the kindergarten ready for the child?
Is there-
And,
Yeah.
I would hear so much from, I don't know that people really understand just the level of discipline that that an early childhood educator has to have to individualize instruction for every child. And, oftentimes our educators would say, are our expectations developmentally appropriate for our children? And I just appreciate that lift of really beginning to interrogate, does the system as it works today truly developmentally appropriate for our children, or do we need to create different conditions that really allow for them to thrive? I just think that's such an important point related to kindergarten readiness, that it's not just about the readiness of the child, it's also about the readiness of the kindergarten to support that child from the point that they enter.
Right. Are we focused on giving them so much summative assessments, or are we formatively assessing our scholars? Meaning, are we changing our instructional strategies to meet the need of the child that enters the room? Or are we already prepared to test them based on what we've just, had professional development to do, right? It's a different time. It's a different world. We need to check our models. Not saying that the work that we're doing is so wrong, but we need to make sure that we're learning from the children that's coming in the doors in order to appropriately teach them and have them ready for the society that they're going to have to meet one day. And it's a different world from where we come from.
I think I would add to that. What was going through my mind is the individual uniqueness. We are in a day and time where you have to look at the whole child.
That's right.
And it to your point, it can't be just about test scores. It can't be. It's what does that child need? And then to Dr. Jameson's point about age appropriateness. When we think about age appropriateness, we also have to think about as an individual. I might be a 5-year-old, but I might have the mentality of a 3-year-old. So we have to, in the early childhood space, we have to account for that. We have to teach those children how to manage themselves. We have to teach the staff how to work with those children. It's a different day and a different time, and we just need to approach education differently in today's age.
Right. Yeah. And Dawn, I would say to what the Early Child Collaborative does, I talked about all of our priorities, but I think the hour is so important as well. That the Early Child Collaborative is made up of the Genesee Intermediate School District and Flint Community Schools and the Flint Center for Educational Excellence, the Community Foundation of Greater Flint, and the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, where we're committed to coming to the table and really putting our systems on that table and interrogating to what extent are we actually being successful in preparing kiddos to be successful in kindergarten, and how do we work better together for that system to become more seamless and more responsive. At the core of our work, that's the commitment of those around this table and our partners who aren't here. And I think that's what positions Flint to really create a model for the country, is that we are constantly focused on how do we continuously improve our systems to ensure that our kiddos have the best possible opportunities.
Dr. Jameson, I was actually thinking about that as I was listening to you all speak about that is definitely one of the successes that have come out of this, is that we have continued to engage and push each other and into positions where we're always thinking about what is best for the children and families, even if it makes us uncomfortable as educators. What is best for the children and the families, and how are we working together to accomplish that? And we've worked so hard to get to this point, and it's just great. That's truly a success of this partnership as well too, and doing that. And then also just very refreshing that we are focusing all the way up to 8 years, because that truly is the end of the early childhood. What is the definition of early childhood? Early childhood does not end at 4 is what people typically look at it. Early childhood is birth through 8 years old. So we have to make sure that we are considering that even first graders, second graders are still in that early childhood gap age where they are still developing their brain. Their brain is still there. They're still, kind of crossing that line of abstract thought and abstract thinking into when they can exit the early childhood age. So it's just very refreshing that we're looking at the full spectrum and not just stopping at 4 years old.
Well, I have one final question, and Dr. Summy, Janelle talked about this earlier about where what the landscape looks like in early childhood. We have Head Start, we have Readiness for Fours, we have the state programs, we have local programs. We've talked about the local collaboration. But can you help us understand how potential changes to federal funding for early childhood education could impact a community like Flint?
Absolutely. I want us to all think of a parent. Just think of a parent or even a family member taking their little one to school. And then one day, and that child might be impacted by the Head Start program. Maybe they're in the GSRP program. Maybe they're in a home visiting program. And then just think about if there's one day where that parent cannot take that child to school because the Head Start program no longer exists. For Genesee ISD, that's an $18.5 million grant. We touch every corner of Genesee County, right? If that goes away, what does all of the parents who are impacted by that, what would they do? Okay, let's consider this. You wake up in the morning, you're making breakfast for your children. You can no longer drive those children to a place, which means you can't go to work now. So as a parent, you can't make money for your household. Those children go to school. Let's say you're a parent who can't afford to feed your children 3 meals a day. Well, at least by taking them to a Head Start program, they get 2 meals a day. They get breakfast, they get lunch. The Head Start program provides the diapers. It provides the formula for those children. We make sure we work with families for their healthcare needs. We have buses and vans that if a family can't get to, for our home visiting program, if they can't get to the doctor, we can provide the transportation for that to make sure that those kiddos get their shots and they get their immunizations. We provide resources for those families. If a family is homeless, our family engagement advocates work with those families. So imagine you take all of that away. We've just now impoverished a community that's already struggling. And so what does that do to the world? You know, it's really hard to even think about losing one grant, let alone the possibilities of all the other funding sources. When I think about our home visitors, they get to go inside the family. We talked about earlier how we teach families how to be their child's first teacher. I know that even for me, even though I was an educator, I was a general education teacher, when I had my first child back in 2001, I didn't know how to I didn't know how to raise a newborn in terms of education. I was a secondary teacher. So those are resources that we're taking away from families, whether they're employees. Oh, the other thing that we do in the programs is we hire those parents. So if you're a parent of a child and you're dropping your child off every day, you have an opportunity to volunteer in the classroom that provides resources for families. You have an opportunity to be employed. We find employment for you. So it's really a huge impact on the community if you think about just taking the Head Start grant alone. The Governor Whitmer, she's done an amazing thing with Pre-K for All, where she's granted access to those families. So districts are able to run their own GSRP programs. So if that funding source goes away, then that impacts the opportunity for districts to help engage their families with meeting those children where they are. It takes away the unique abilities, the individuality that each district has. So it's going to be detrimental to the community if we lose funding for Head Start, GSRP, and home visiting programs.
And these aren't limited to the city of Flint.
No.
These are countywide. So
yeah,
this is out
Head
in
Start is federal funding.
rural communities as
Yes.
well who would be impacted.
Yes, yes.
That's right. And to Dr. Tommy's point, that's what you're describing is the potential impact on Genesee County, but it's counties across this country, right? Head Start is funded in all 50 states, and the potential of that loss of service can have exactly what Dr. Summy described. I love thinking about it in the context of a parent, right? That could be parents, millions of parents
yes.
across this country who are trying to figure out, how do I address this loss of a core portion of the safety net that I rely on to ensure that I can keep my child safe and ensure that they're prepared. I think it's just so important to acknowledge. And also, when we focus on a parent, I think it also just lifts how central the early childhood system is to life, right? We talk a lot of times about two open windows. The child's brain develops more in the first 5 years of their life than at any other point along there. You go to college, you get degrees, all that. Your brain is not developing at the rate that it was developing between birth and age 5. But often that birth to age 5 period is also an open window for parents as well, who moms often have a disruption in employment because they have to have a baby. And then, there's, a lot of our parents are young or in transitional spaces of their lives. And so an opportunity to enroll your child in a Head Start program and to find a career as an early educator, we're able to harness those two open windows and create opportunity for both the child and the parent. And that's something that is, I think, so special, as like Dr. said, as a trained secondary educator and feeling like I had a good grip on that. What makes early childhood truly special is being able to transform the life experience of the child and the parent together. Absolutely. And that being the universal expectation of how this system works.
And even to think about just the jobs for our educators. I mean, wow. We already have a shortage.
Yes.
In the education field, right? So what's making that attractive? If there's the conversation about possibility of not having funding to provide the most foundational resource that we need in our community is the early learners, right? And then to think that as an educator, why would teachers want to go into the field if there's a possibility of a threat that they can't even teach in the space? So we really have to take a look at the ecosystem, as Dr. Jameson said, and that's the beauty to the collaborative. That's the beauty to the work that we do at the collaborative table, is because we look at all of it and we have hard conversations about how to strengthen the ecosystem, how to strengthen all of the systems so that we, if the funding should go away for whatever reason, we still have a strong foundation. We have a strong partnership and a strong network to try to keep the community safe, and that we can still educate children.
I would say, we understand in Michigan, and what I would hope that legislators understand across the country is that early childhood education is not a liberal issue. It's not a conservative issue. It's not even just an education issue. But to Dr. Sami's point about, if you have a 10-year-old, or maybe that's not right, but if you have a 12-year-old and you need to work, you can tell the 12-year-old, hey, stay safe, right? Sit at home. You can't leave a 6-week-old at home and go to work. Right. And so removing a key aspect of our childcare infrastructure is an economic development issue. It's a business issue. It's a finance issue. And so I would really just implore legislators across the country to understand how central early childhood education is to the workforce, to economic development, and to the stability of our economy, not just the stability of individual families and children as well.
Yeah, and just thinking of that as well, too, to that point, I know Governor Whitmer has continued to increase the per pupil budget for early childhood within Michigan. However, nationwide, as I'm looking at the proposal to Congress for flat funding, though, for Head Start, that also has potential detriments to our infrastructure. We know that there are rising costs always. As Dr. Sami pointed out, we purchase the diapers, we purchase the formula, we pay for the food. All of those things have a rising cost. Our electricity, our gas for heat, all of those have rising costs. If we continue to be flat funded, then we have to look back at our budget and say, okay, we know we need heat in the classrooms, so we can't take away from there. We can't take away from the food. What do you start taking away from so you can ensure that those basic needs are met? You don't want to have to make those decisions on the quality end of it as well either. So that it can also be detrimental.
So what I'm hearing is funding becomes, well, it's always a critical part of something like this, but it is not just about early childhood, as Dr. Jamerson has said. It literally touches every aspect
Absolutely.
Of our community.
It's interconnected across all the systems.
And that's why it's key for us to ensure that we are connected to lawmakers, right? And having those conversations and giving them the opportunity to see physically what's happening in our school systems and in our institutions. Because don't forget, Flint faced a water crisis. And the trust in institutions is still an issue in our community. And we really want our parents to trust what we do, what we bring into the table for them. But lawmakers are important in that. And when they go back to their tables, we would have to have said something to them and shown them just how important it is for us to continue to do the work that we do every day.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I want to thank everyone for coming today and for participating in this incredibly important conversation about kindergarten readiness and the early childhood landscape in Flint and all that entails. You have been listening to THRIVEcast, the podcast program of the Flint Center for Educational Excellence.